This year we're looking at ageing and museums, and this is based around work that we have developed already and a project we've just got funding for, which is called Encountering the Unexpected, which we're just about to start in April. So there'll be more about that later. I'm really delighted to have such a mixture of participants here. It's really good to have people from local museums, to have students from our PhD programme and from our Master's programme as well. So we have a real mixture of people who are both from the local area and who come from literally all over the world. So we've got a real mixture of people. I'm also delighted that there are people from different backgrounds and contexts. So not just from the museum sector, and that's really important for us as well. Just before I say anything else, my colleague Rob Clark will be filming this event because we would like our distance learning students to be able to participate in the experience as well. So we will be doing that. So we'd ask, when you're asking questions, can you use the microphone please? So just so that students will be able to hear. So that would be brilliant, thank you. So the theme of this session is museums and an ageing population. Globally, the population is ageing, and by 2050 it's estimated that 1 in 4 people in the UK will be over the age of 65. What are the implications of an ageing population for museums? Age is often presented as a burden, as a problem, and associated with an inevitable physical and mental decline. But how can museums support older people to realise their full potential and to keep participating in society in meaningful and fulfilling ways? How can museums promote the rights of older people? This session is very much a conversation about museums and ageing, and we want your participation, your views, your questions and your ideas. But the session will begin with our panellists, and I'm really delighted to welcome Clare Keating, who's the former First Commissioner for Older People in Northern Ireland. We'll briefly speak about the implications of an ageing population. I heard Clare speak at an event in Northern Ireland in the autumn last year and was absolutely blown away by her passion and challenge that she presented. So I think we're in for a really interesting session. I'd also like to introduce Esmé Ward, who is Head of Learning and Engagement at the Manchester Museum and the Whitworth Gallery. And she will give us a brief glimpse of museum practice, specifically in Manchester, which is an age-friendly city. And Esme's been doing fantastic work around this for many years and is incredibly skilled in this area. So this session will explore how museums can meet the needs of older people, create inspiring, creative, engaging encounters, and also put older people and people's rights at the centre of museum practice. So I'm going to pass over now to Clare, who's going to begin by just talking a little bit about the implications of an ageing population.
Good evening. Thank you very much indeed, Jocelyn, for that welcome, and good evening to all of you. And I understand that while some of you are working already in careers in museums and curating and art, a large number of you are studying and hoping to have that career. You want it, you're hungry for it, you want to share art, ideas, passion, bring people together, care about the world, care about the things that matter to people. And you're trying to learn how to do it and find the tools to do it better. So I wish you all the very, very best in that, because art and creativity and culture have the most incredible intrinsic value. They can make our hearts sing, they can make us feel valued, they can make us feel that we belong in a place and a time, and that the things that we've invested our lives in have not only meaning and value to us, but meaning and value to other people. And that, I think, is the best of art, creativity, culture, curating. And there is, of course, also a lot of money to be made in art, and there's also a lot of poverty to be had in art. So wherever you sit in it, whether you're going to starve and paint, or whether you're going to be plucked from the starving and paint beautiful things and be bought by somebody who is incredibly rich, it seems to be very random in the art world, and I don't envy any of you who are trying to make it as artists in that world. but certainly the creativity, the culture and the representation of the life around us is hugely, hugely important. And so I think you've got a very long and promising career in front of you, because forever human beings have collected things and put them together and shared them and tucked them away and hidden them and kept them safe and got them out on special occasions. There's nothing new, I don't think, in bringing collections together. There is something new and something different, certainly in a UK culture, about valuing all of the things that all sorts of people create. We tend to place enormous value on the things that important people create, and we then have to look at what we mean by important people. Who are they? We place enormous value on important people and the things that matter to them. And then we call other things craft. So we have art, and then we have craft. Incredibly skilled, beautiful things made by people who very rarely had the privilege of training or 3 or 4 years out to study that craft, but are incredibly skilled at making beautiful things. And I think in the museum sector, and certainly amongst some of the exhibitions and work on ageing, what I've seen is an overlap between art, new creativity, and craft, bringing together items, objects, things, experiences, and oral history as well, to make and create space for there to be value on all of the things that matter to that group of people. And we are a better and a richer society because more of us are living longer and healthier lives than ever before. No, really, we are. I know, though, however, we are a deeply ageist society. And I think across the world there is a huge anxiety amongst decision makers and planners about what is it. How many of you heard this, whichever countries you're from? How many of you have heard this? What are we going to do with old people? They're going to need so much care. They're going to need housing. Their pensions are going to cost so much money. How are we going to look after them? How many of you have heard that, whichever country you're from? Put your hand up if you've ever heard it. Now, thank you. And it's true, there are challenges of an ageing population. Of course there are. There are challenges of every age of population. But there are challenges to do with ageing. As more of us live longer, of course, more people will develop dementia. Because as we live longer, the proportion increases of people who live with that condition. Other life-limiting conditions, other chronic illnesses that people do acquire with age very often. But there is not a tsunami of care costs coming. There is not a crisis in planning. And if there is, anybody who's a planner should be ashamed of themselves, because nobody who's 80 today started being 80 today. They started being 80 the day they were born. That's when they started being 80. The trajectory has been very clear. For a large number of years, we are going to continue to live longer and healthier lives. And across the world, relatively small increases in GDP and in personal income levels again see societies with increasing longevity. Nothing new, nothing unexpected in that. Yet still you will see planners and people saying, we don't know what to do, we don't know how to do it, we don't know, in the UK, where are we going to find the nurses, we don't know what it is we're going to do. We could start by looking at the contribution that older people make. I started by saying we're a richer and a better society because more of us are living longer, and it's true. If you take into account the things that older people contribute, as well as the things that older people use. And yes, older people do use health and social care in larger numbers and larger proportions, particularly as they become very old, than a younger, healthier element of the population. But they contribute enormous amounts of money to our economies. If you place value on the volunteering that older people do, that social glue that holds together all of the activities of community life, faith organisations that would fall apart if it wasn't for the voluntary contribution of older people. If you value the childcare provided by untold older people up and down the country and across the world, caring very often for their grandchildren so that their own children can go to work and paid employment without the burden of childcare costs themselves. And also because there's value in those intergenerational relationships. So those younger people and those grandchildren have the opportunity to experience the older generation in a way that the previous generation simply didn't have. And then if you take into account, because don't forget, they don't just use stuff for older people, they pay tax too. They pay a lot of tax. So they're also paying a lot of taxes. So they are contributing through volunteering, through caring and through taxes paid. And simply in the UK, if you set on one column health costs, additional social care costs to do with ageing, and you add all of that up, and then on the other side you set out those contributions made by older people across the UK on a robust economic model, the UK is £40 billion a year better off because we are an ageing population. So the next time somebody says, do you know, I don't know what we're going to do with those old people, I have no idea how we're going to care for them, I would say value them first, set up your paradigm differently, value their contribution, and secondly, plan for it. If we are having trouble recruiting and retaining nurses and care workers to care for older people, maybe that's because of the value we place on older people and the value we place on those jobs. If we want people to do the jobs, give them proper shift patterns, give them proper wages, give them proper training, give them proper respect. And I would suggest that the closer we get in work terms to the front line of care for older people and care for the dependent and vulnerable, the less those people are paid and the less they're engaged. And I would say in work around museums and in culture and arts, it will be very easy for you to reach an included group of older people. They'll come in their hundreds, they'll come on bus trips, they'll come with their community groups, they'll be very happy, they'll really like the sandwiches, they'll enjoy the day out, they'll have a marvellous time, they'll be pleasant, they'll be interested, they'll feel valued. They might have gone anyway. So what is it about your work that's going to bring in the people who wouldn't otherwise come, who aren't joiners in us to clubs maybe, or who don't think that museums are for them? What is it that's going to bring those people in? And I suggest that some of it may be work around reminiscence and looking at what has value. And it's very popular. And I'm sure most of you have seen, at least in theory, taking out reminiscence boxes to community groups and unpacking things and objects that people can feel and hold and enjoy. Hugely valuable and hugely popular. How many of you have seen value being placed on old people as contributors to cultural development, contributors to art, people with experience that they can bring to bear on the development of those services? And I think that's the challenge. There's a very easy market to find of people who will appreciate a nice day out and enjoy it, and it will be good for their mental health and their social contact. But they will be consumers and participants. And I think the challenge is partly to regard older people as contributors, at least as much as participants. And I think we see far, far, far too much of that problem of ageing and not enough about the contribution. And I think it is time for people in your positions to start looking again at older people as people. If you look at governments across the world, most of them are stuffed full of older people. They don't think of themselves as older people because they're still important. They still have value. They're still making decisions. So they don't think of themselves as older people. That's other people. So we're still defining in that world older people as the excluded, the vulnerable, the poor, the frail, the ill, the socially isolated, the lonely. It's not us. And I think the sooner we start saying this is a society for people of all ages, because today's younger people are tomorrow's older people. At least we hope so, because the alternative isn't so great. So if we all hope to be tomorrow's older people, if nothing else, enlightened self-interest will make you want it to be a good place to grow older. And I think if you look at the intrinsic value of creativity, we've all got it inside us. We all appreciate it, but the overwhelming majority of people don't go to museums. They don't go to art galleries, but they like things that give them joy. They like things that challenge them, and they like things that give them ideas. And I think in work with ageing, you can break some of those barriers down to do with what is art, what is culture, what has value, and look instead maybe at what is it that gives people joy and challenge and opportunity. So I think as curators, as organisers, you will have a fabulous career. There's a fabulous international career to be had. I don't doubt it for a moment. You'll meet interesting people. You'll see and touch and hold incredible things. You'll hear people talking about lives that they've had and worlds that they've seen that will blow you away. You'll never have heard of it. You'll need to double check whether it really could have been like that because it'll seem so far away. You will meet incredible people. But it could be tedious too, because you could just be on the coattails of following funding and stick on a bit of an exhibition that ticks a box. We got some older people in, that does that job. Don't do that. It's too tedious. You don't need to waste your money studying to do that. You're here at the heart of the University of Leicester with a passion for learning and a passion for excellence. So don't do the ordinary. Reach a bit higher and look at it and say, what is it that makes up the difference between older people and the rest of the population? Not just some older people. What is it about ageing, the ageing process, that liberates us as we age and limits us as we age? And how can creativity and culture tap into that? And you have an opportunity to be those people that change that way of thinking from older people as consumers, participants, who need to be helped a bit to come and see something to get their day in, to people who are co-contributors, valuable, and without whom, frankly, you wouldn't be here. So I think there is a fabulous career for you, and there is a fabulous set of opportunities across the world, and to keep in touch with each other as well. To keep in touch with each other. You've met people, what a privilege. You've met people from bits of the world that when you started studying you'd only heard of. You've met real people, and you can feel them now too, can't you? You know what makes them tick. You're interested in them. Be like that about older people too, because too much of the world around ageing still is very paternalistic, and you will still hear, oh, we love old people. Well, no, we don't. They're not all nice. And of course they're not all nice, because people aren't all nice. People are people. And as they age, they become more interested in some things and less interested in others, and their lives develop. But they're not nice as a group, or kind as a group, or helpful as a group, or anything as a group, because they're not a group. They're just the people that yesterday weren't older people, and as it tipped over the next birthday, they are older people. They're the same people. So don't think you can just tidy them up into a group and put them into the older people section. Because some of them will go, you'll be able to tick your box, you can get your life in doing that, but you've been wasting your money studying. So enjoy, change that framework, and embrace, really embrace a society in which people of all ages have value and similar value. And where creativity and access to arts is generally and really, truly, not only available to everybody, but that we value all sorts of art and creativity. And where the things and the experiences that we create and that we value can be explored and shared and treasured by all sorts of different people. You have a unique contribution to make, as I've said, and valuing today's and tomorrow's older people and respecting creativity will enrich your own lives, the lives of the older people in your own families and in people you know, and you will make it so much better for the generations to come. You will develop exhibitions that validate people's lives, that look forward, that co-create, that find things that you'd never heard of. You've studied all sorts of things, you're clever, you've got exams. You'd never heard of that kind of culture or placed value on it. You'd never run across it. You'd never seen it. You'd never heard of it. You will be exposed to the privilege of the richness of the world's life. And I would say to you, older people, today's older people, make a huge, huge contribution to life. So do tomorrow's older people. So get out there and enjoy it, but never think that older people are just one blob of humanity, because they're just individuals of a certain age. Good luck.
A real challenge. I knew I had some self-interest in this, enlightened self-interest, I'll remember that one. That's brilliant. We're going to move over now to Esme, who's going to talk about some of the experiences she has working in this area in Manchester.
Okay.
What's happened to this?
Hello.
Oh, it's all right, Carrie's just doing. Carrie, it's all right, we're on
Right.
one PowerPoint.
Oh, is that okay? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Hello. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm particularly pleased to be here because I've worked in museums for 25 years. I've never worked anywhere other than museums, in spite of the fact that I didn't actually enter one until I was 19. I'd never been through the doors of a museum, and it changed my life. And actually lots of the things that Claire's spoken about, there will be these little themes bubbling away when I talk about some of the work we do. And those are about reach, how we reach to people, or all people, the power of people. I'm not really a bricks and mortar person. I've spent the last 8 years working on the Whitworth renovation. It's been all about bricks and mortar, but mostly the work's been about the people. And actually, the role that culture can play. We're talking about how we can have a different kind of narrative around ageing here. And I think culture and museums have a really significant part to play in telling a different story about ageing. And that's what I want to talk a little to you about, and how, in our way, we're doing that in Manchester, and some of the things that we're learning en route. So, first of all, I just want to give a shout out, for those who don't know, for the Age Friendly Museum Network. You may know, you may not. Manchester's one of the founding partners. British Museum, National Museums Northern Ireland and Glasgow Museums, all of them essentially prodding the museum sector to start really thinking about how it develops work with, by and for older people. And I don't actually want to say much more than just to point you in the direction of that. One of the things we've been talking and thinking about a lot in Manchester is how somewhere like the Whitworth and the Museum might actually have an ethos of care as an organisation. And I think this is a really good place to start, because actually this isn't just, we know how to care for collections, that's what we do. But actually the thing that's really interested me over the last 20 years, but the last 10 in particular, is I'm noticing a real ethos of care about how we work with people and their ideas and the relationships. And I think that relates very directly to this work. So I just want to explore a bit what that actually means. And I'm just going to do it using lots of nice images. So I'm going to talk about some things that Claire's already mentioned. Museums and galleries are social spaces. They're free. They bring people together. They're incredibly stimulating visually. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know here. But what we notice is they encourage conversations. They encourage learning, maybe informally, but it's absolutely there. You encounter the unexpected. One of my favourite ever moments in Manchester Museum was walking through our vivarium, our live animals area. And there was a lady in a wheelchair, very elderly, she was with a family, there were lots of them there, and they were very excited. She had balloons hanging off the back of her wheelchair. And I went up to her and said, "Oh, yeah, hi, have you got a celebration? I noticed the balloons." And she said, "Yes, it's my 100th birthday today. It's why I'm here." And I said, "Wait there." And we ran, and Andrew, who's the curator of the vivarium, brought out a chameleon. And she sat there with this chameleon on her arm. And she just looked at us with this twinkle, just grinned and said, "You know what? You're never too old, are you, to experience something new?" And her husband said, "Get that bloody thing off her arm," and shouted at us and got really annoyed. But that's sort of the point, actually, that encountering the unexpected. Museums are very powerful places to do this. We find whether you're from the UK, whether you're newly arrived family in Manchester, whether you're 3 years old, whether you're 93, you may just all encounter something that scares the heck out of you, that you've never seen. They're wonderful spaces for that. They're also great spaces to learn new skills. This is a programme at the Whitworth, which is led by a group of older men, and I will be talking a lot about older men shortly. Not as a blob, I hope. This is a handmade programme where actually they're developing their skills. But also how you work beyond your museum walls, your gallery walls. So this is a digital engagement programme, something called Art Sense. It was developed with older learners from the Workers' Educational Association, and actually it came as a result of some work we've done with stroke patients, and on the dementia ward we have a big health and culture programme, and actually it came as feedback from families that they were very unhappy that lots of the digital technology that the nurses were asking them, their family members to use, were developed for very young children. They didn't want to play puddle ducks or whatever those games were. And so actually we started to think about using our collections to create these mobile technologies. So have a look at that. It's an interesting way to extend your museum collection. But we also take our collections out. That fox has been all over the place. We take it into hospital settings, into care settings, we have a mobile museum, we have a van, it goes all over. And actually, we want to take it into a wide range of settings. We want to reach people who aren't necessarily able to come in through our walls. And this is some work we did on the dementia ageing research unit at the hospital. And actually, this was a whole creativity programme. We don't actually do reminiscence work at the museum. We tend to focus much more on learning and creativity rather than reminiscence programmes, although there are some brilliant reminiscence programmes. And actually it's changed how we work. Because if you do all of this work, you need to start thinking about how you really welcome people. The role of people. I get very frustrated when I hear lots of museums talking about all the reasons they can't do this work. And actually, oh, we can't do that, we've got a terrible space here. It's always about the bricks and mortar. And actually there's some really simple things you can do. So if you come to the Whitworth Museum, every member of staff who engages with the public and all volunteers are trained as dementia friends. It's not difficult. It's brilliant awareness training that the Dementia Friends run. It's just, it actually enables them to have a better welcome for all our visitors. And I was involved in the Dementia Friendly Guide. But actually what I really want to focus on now is the people. And this is the bit I like talking about. So this is about the relationship building. And here, this is actually an image. This is a guy called Ed, who's in the team at the Whitworth. When the gallery closed, I asked all of my team to go and spend a day a week living with somebody else. So go and be based. So our primary coordinator went and volunteered in a forest school. Somebody else went and was based in the stroke ward at the hospital who runs our health programme. Ed, because he's very canny, ran the coffee morning at Johnny Johnson Residential Care for a year. No KPIs. This was purely about building relationships. And actually, it really started to change the way we do our work. I'm going to come back to Ed, and particularly older men, shortly. But I want to give a sense of the context in which we do this work. Manchester is cited as an age-friendly city. It's actually one of the few cities in the UK that hasn't got an ageing population. We're all getting younger, apparently. But we work very hard to align ourselves with the ambition of the city. Age-friendly Manchester, the thing to me that is significant about this is not about a medical care model. This is actually about thinking about those individuals, absolutely everything that Clare was talking about. It's thinking about those individuals as citizens, active citizenship, and the role they're in. And so we have a member of my team at the gallery who is funded by Public Health. It's quite unusual to have a public health post within a museum, and all that she does, is work with and for older people in cultural organisations across the city. So if you work in a theatre or an orchestra or a gallery in Manchester, we all get together quite regularly and we think about how we work with and for older people. Across the city we have 150 culture champions who are older volunteers who participate in culture and then advocate for it in some shape or form in their communities. And I'll come on to those some more as well. This is my very favourite, I'm afraid. This is Ray, and I was telling Clare, I'll do this without the swear words, about the conversation that we had. So these guys come, they participate in programmes right across the piece, and then they go and share and they encourage others to engage with them. And they do that whether that's a conversation they have at the hairdressers, within shelter accommodation, wherever it might be, family members. And these conversations aren't always easy. So, and actually the best ones are the ones that aren't easy. So these are our greatest advocates, but brilliantly, they're also our greatest critics. So when we had a meeting a couple of years ago, we were looking at Arts Council funding for a big arts and older people's programme, and Ray absolutely lost his rag about an hour in. There was a lot of effing and faffing. I have taken swear words out. Because actually, he got so frustrated. He said, God, I've sat here listening to you endlessly go on and on and on about what Manchester's cultural offer can do for me. When the hell are you going to ask what I can do for it? And that's what making that shift is all about. Actually, what can they do? I look across Manchester and I see a whole host of champions and more who are full of ideas, expertise, creativity, and we are not making the most of it. We are idiotic not to make more of it. So that's the journey we're on, is really thinking, whether you call it co-production, I don't really care, but we are really thinking about how we do that. So Manchester Art Gallery, a couple of months ago, held a late galleries open late. The entire evening was programmed by the culture champions, and it was around a theme they were particularly interested in. We have a programme that's ongoing at the moment, terrible title, called Vintage FM, but it's actually working with a community radio station and the BBC, and we're training a whole group of culture champions to be broadcasters. And All FM, our local radio station, they're broadcasting on it, talking about culture and the role that plays. They're coming into our spaces, interviewing anyone, everyone. They're taking mobile radio stations all over. And across Manchester, there's a charity who will go into your home if you're elderly, if you're more socially isolated, and they will tune your radio into the things that are of interest to you. So it's connecting in to all of that work. But what about those who don't visit? Because I completely agree with Clare, actually you can do a lot of work, we can do all sorts of programmes, and we have everything from dementia programmes, and there's a lot of coercion there, so all these people who are being bought in. We have lots of other programmes which are aimed at age-friendly audiences, but actually those are audiences that may already come. So I think what we need to do is really think about how we reach those who aren't coming. And when the gallery closed, just before it closed, we had a long conversation about who's really not visiting, actually, who's really not coming in our doors. And we have a lot of age-friendly audiences compared to many museums. But a group who we really weren't reaching were older men. Massive issues around cultural participation in older men. And we spoke to the Baring Foundation, who fund a lot of arts and older people's programmes. And they said this is an issue right across the sector. This isn't just a gallery issue. So what are you going to do about it? And so they gave us a small amount of money to actually really start to think about what do we do about this. We worked with a whole group of different older men's groups. We actually had the brilliant session, which was about 30 of us, most of them older men, but actually a few wives as well, carers, a wide range. And the whole session was just called Where Are All the Older Men? Actually. And we just started thinking about allotments within hospital contexts. I commented that actually there are an awful lot of them in the Wetherspoons over the road because they had a brilliant offer on a Wednesday afternoon. And we sort of said, and they said, no, really, there are a lot of them over the road. So we commissioned a poet. He was based in that Wetherspoons over the road every Wednesday for 9 months. And all he was doing was talking to those guys about why the hell they wouldn't go to that place, the Whitworth, just over the road. He's produced a very wonderful poem called Life, Love, Death and Art Machismo about exactly why they weren't going. Ed, who you saw earlier, travelled up and down the UK looking at places that were really engaging older men. Everything from a Bengali dance organisation in Bethnal Green through to a men's shed in Rhyl, all sorts of different things. And we looked at actually what we might need to do differently. So there are a series of case studies. There's a handbook for cultural engagement with older men that you can download from our website that brings all of those findings together and actually comes up with a whole series of really simple things. How do you brand for blokes? Is there even such a thing as branding for blokes? What's that all about? How do you reach this particular audience? And we learnt a lot in doing this. We developed a handmade programme. But we also had an exhibition. We worked with a small group that we've been working with for a couple of years in a care setting. None of them had previously visited the gallery. And they used our collections. They did insights into and out of our collections. This is their title, great title. And so what they did is they wanted to explore masculinity in work through our collections. So they curated a show. Very, very straightforward. It is probably, in our opening year, one of our most popular shows in the gallery because it had their insights and the public are genuinely interested in these stories. So this is a Henry Moore image and this is just one of the comments from a guy who's an engineer. Very, very simple, but incredibly powerful. And new insights is actually one of the reasons I work in culture. That's what I think our public are interested in. And this is one of the group. When the Whitworth won Museum of the Year, which was wonderful, when the judges came, they came on an evening when there were over 1,000 young people from Moss Side and Hume all over the galleries. So great. Very diverse audiences. But actually one of the judges called Fiammetta Rocco from The Economist was most interested in the age-friendly work we did. And one of the comments that they made when we won the award was, "You are a museum of the future." And everybody assumed that they said that because we were full of young people. And I got in touch with her and she said, no. The reason you're a museum of the future is because of that Danger Men at Work show. It's because of all the work you're doing around ageing populations. It's because you are working across the life course. That is what a museum of the future needs to do. It needs to work with everyone and make the most of it. And I've got one final, because actually what else are our museums for? And I've got one final good news story that I just want to share. Maria, who's director at the Whitworth, was involved in the Venice Biennale choosing who might be the next artist to represent the UK at Venice. And I don't know whether anybody here is aware, but I'm very delighted it's Phila de Barlo, fantastic, older female artist. And I was talking to Maria about this, said her work is wonderful, but also it is time, it feels contemporary and it feels current that we now start to truly recognise the contribution of older artists. It's been there the whole time and it's only now, hopefully, we're starting to wake up.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Esme. It's incredibly impressive work and over a sustained period of time in such a variety of different ways. Okay, so we've had some very thought-provoking challenges there, I think, in terms of thinking about older people. Do we have any questions that you would like to ask? Yes, Karen.
Hello. I just wondered, when you talk about an ageing population, I'm quite aware that quite often people say to me, 40 is the new 30, 50 is the new 40 or whatever. I just wondered, with those moving sort of boundaries around age and the increasing age at which people are going to retire, I mean, it's quite likely that a lot of people in this room are not going to be retiring until they're in their 70s. I just wondered what you mean by an ageing population and where you're drawing the sort of the boundary around that.
So it is a very interesting question. It varies across different countries in the world as well, how aging and ageing are defined. Certainly the World Health Organization defines an older person as somebody aged 50 and over, which in an affluent Western context is really long past it. You know, seems very young. But of course in countries with very low life expectancy, 50 can be really quite old. And working in a Northern Irish context, again, our traveller population, most of them were very lucky if they did reach 50. So there's a variety of issues to do with picking an age. I prefer a life course approach and the idea that we are all living longer in general, longer and healthier lives than ever before. And there are challenges and opportunity that different phases of life presents, but that a particular numeric age doesn't define you. So you can look at a lot of evidence and they'll say, well, people over 75 start consuming more health and social care services. Well, some people over 75 do, some people don't. But there is an increasing proportion, so that kind of public health type approach is quite common. But I would say that as a general rule, there are issues to do with an ageing population, to do with people stopping work, to do with being excluded from society, largely ill-considered, and society not being prepared for their needs, regardless of age. So wherever those needs come up, I couldn't pick an age or define a programme. Certainly as the Commissioner for Older People, the legislation I worked to defined older people as 60 and over. And in exceptional circumstances I could intervene with the over 50s. But there's quite a lot of prevarication about what is an older person. And really I think the definition of an older person could easily be when you feel you can't do something because of your because somebody is denying it to you on the grounds of age, then people say they feel like an older person. People say they don't feel like an older person until somebody says, you can't have that procedure because you're too old for it. Or you're too old to emigrate now to that country because they only want people under a certain age. You're too old for an apprenticeship. You're too old to do certain things. Then people feel like an older person. But other than that, it's quite linear and it much more depends on your own personal experience of life. And certainly the amount of time that people live with chronic illness is very much at the forefront of our health inequalities debate in the UK, and that the relatively disadvantaged, relatively poor will on average live many more years with chronic ill health than will those who started with relative affluence and advantage. Even though those with relative advantage on average will live longer overall, it's not that many more years compared to the disparity in chronic illness. So it's a bit of a waffly answer, but it's one of those ones that to get there you really don't want to start from there at all. Because the age thing does, the definition of older varies, and in different countries it is a very, very different experience, and within different countries the actual age at which people experience that exclusion can change.
I was just going to say, it is worth noting, it is worth noting though that I'm really noticing over 75s coming out, and certainly in terms of the recent data around cultural participation, a really significant drop off over the age of 75, and there's certainly more funding coming through now. Sorry to do funding, but there is much more funding coming through looking at later age, I've seen it called, with over 75. So I think in Manchester it's over 50s, which is, you know, as you say, for some very relevant, for others absolutely not.
I was sort of wondering how you measure success.
Sorry, can you use the microphone? Sorry.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking as well, if you're measuring a project and you want to be able to sort of know whether you've reached that older audience, I was wondering how you then sort of evaluate it, and if it's over 75 then it's quite clear, but if it's along a whole range of things, then it's a lot harder to know if you've reached the audience you're aiming for.
And I suppose there's success in terms of each gallery and each exhibition and each museum itself is how it measures its success. And I suppose my experience, I would take it a slightly other way and look instead at saying, does our older population have that hope, confidence and certainty that it needs? Is it hopeful about its future? Is it confident in its current environment? And is it certain that if it needs care or protection or support, that will be there without question? And then I don't care if they go to museums or not. Because then you have discerning customers with rights who are making informed choices. And some of them will not want to go, and a lot of them will. And a lot of them, given a more open opportunity, will engage with it. But I think it is much more about that hope, confidence and certainty as a participant and a valued person.
Do you think there's also something though, I'm very conscious within the age-friendly context, one of the, I was saying earlier to Clare, I've rarely worked in any, and I've done lots of work with early years and young people, it is the most collaborative area. So I represent culture for Manchester in the age-friendly context, and I sit in a senior strategy group where I have next to me the head for Greater Manchester Transport on my right. On my left I have somebody who's there for clinical commissioning, social care, research, design, urban design, all of us in the room doing just one thing, which is actually from our distinct perspectives all saying what do we need to do to make Manchester a really great place to grow older. And actually really quite significant self-interest. There's a whole host of ambassadors across the city who are in their 40s, who are actually age-friendly ambassadors looking at how they create the Manchester that they want to grow older in. So I think there's something about that level of collaboration, actually, whether people are coming to museums and participating in culture or not, understanding that if you are a city where people thrive rather than just survive, that access to culture absolutely has to be part of it, alongside health and the others.
That's a lovely concept, the idea of wanting to thrive rather than just survive. That's a really important, really powerful one. I'm interested in the role that museums have as public places for debate within society, to raise questions and to debate those about the kind of society we want in relation to ageing. And as a place where we can have a discussion and a debate about how people are treated and how we value older people. I'm just interested in thinking of how you can use your space as a place to communicate as well. So it's a place where you can have exhibitions, where you can challenge people's ideas.
I think you can, definitely, but I also, I'm quite a big fan of joy. actually, and beauty, and I think that, so if that can absolutely be part of it, that's for me why I was talking about museums as a different kind of narrator, but only if it fits with your museum and who you are, not as this. I can't think of anything worse than going to a museum and feel I'm being presented with a view because I'm going to be engaged in debate. It would just turn me off, I'm afraid. It's not why I personally go to museums. So I think absolutely it can. The Danger Men at Work was a very interesting programme because ultimately it was an exhibition with images of ageing and masculinity. But actually whether you perceived it as that or whether it was insights into a collection from somebody very different from yourself or somebody very like you, we did a lot around it that people could participate in. We did academic conferences, social isolation, all of that, looking at key issues that we felt it connected to. But actually, we wanted it to be something that you encounter as a museum visitor on your own terms. Jeremy.
Hi, Jonathan Platt, Heritage Lottery Fund, East Midlands. Very interested in the debate, don't disagree with anything I've heard, but I also see an awful lot of the opposite. There are a large number of voluntary run organisations throughout this region and indeed across the country that are dominated by older people, and I'm sure that's brilliant. That's really engaging, it's good for them. But the common cause is that they're struggling for volunteers, they're struggling to survive. Where is the succession planning? How do we engage with younger people or society as a whole? How do we keep ourselves sustainable and so on? So lots of people are engaged in there, but it does seem to be exclusive, and it's almost the other side of the debate that you're portraying. And I'm just interested in your comments and views on that, whether that's your experience as well.
I mean, there are voluntary organisations which are heavily, and we can either call it dominated or supported by older people, depending on how we sit. And there are older people in that with a variety of motivations for being involved in those organisations, and some of them are better motivations than others, and some of them are better at succession planning than others, and others would rather die than give up the position of being the chair, and others feel hugely put upon by the amount of responsibility that they are asked and pressed to take, which is more than they wanted to take, but they feel a responsibility for it. So it comes back to that, the role of the individual and the older person. But I think that there are big issues to do with the amount of voluntarism that we expect in society now, the amount we expect older people to be supported, engaged with, cared for, and I suppose just engaged with generally by volunteers. And the closer you get, as I said earlier, the closer you get to actually meeting a real older person, the less you're likely to be paid, or the more likely you are to be a volunteer, and the more removed the decision makers are likely to be, and more protective of the worlds of planning and strategy that they occupy, that they're likely to remain in. And I think there are thousands of voluntary organisations across the UK, thousands and thousands, with a lot of older people involved in with them. And those governance bodies, those management committees, trustees, whatever we call them, need an awful lot of encouragement and support and input in order not to become just tied into looking for the funding application or has somebody sorted out the insurance or feeling put upon. And maybe it's the amount of support that they need. Because if you look at it from another perspective, we talk to businesses about older workers. Generally speaking, across the UK, we cannot develop our economy as we wish to unless more people stay in work for longer. It's just a fact. No older person is taking a job from a younger person. It's not like that. The jobs that older people occupy generally aren't the entry-level jobs or the jobs that younger people would be going into. And businesses need to retain and continue to invest in training their older workers. And when you listen to positive employers, they will talk about older workers generally as reliable. They don't come in with a hangover on a Monday. They have corporate loyalty. They have corporate memory and knowledge. They tend to be good at team working and good at working with new people coming in and helpful and worth investing in the main. And then you get outside of the room, and again, a lot of employers then, or more off the record, will say, yes, but it's very hard to get rid of people, and there's no default retirement age, there's no automatic retirement age anymore, so it's dead hard to get rid of somebody anymore, and they're not really performing very well, but years ago we could have got rid of them at 65, and now we don't know what to do. And I would say again, the same with voluntary organisations as with employers. That's not the problem of the older person, that's not an age problem, that's a management and cultural problem. If you've got employees who are rubbish when they're 70, they were probably rubbish when they were 60, they were probably definitely rubbish when they were 20, 30, 40 and 50, and nobody's performance managed it properly. And if you look across a lot of our sectors of employment, they're like that. And I think a lot of voluntary organisations as well don't challenge their management committees and their boards of trustees enough and step into that role and want to take it on. And I think there is a challenge all round, particularly for trustees in the thousands of voluntary organisations. How are they supported? How are they invested in? How are they valued and engaged with? Because they do carry a weight of responsibility, but they can also hold on to that little bit of power that goes with it, and that can keep other people out. And that can be amongst older people, but I don't think it's an age issue.
I think there's something else, which is we talk a lot in the museum profession about diversity within the workforce. We very rarely talk about age as part of that conversation. I know because I was saying we have, in fact the Heritage Lottery Fund have supported as part of a broader volunteering programme a post which is specifically an age-friendly volunteer. It's a paid post, but they are supporting a volunteering programme, and we specifically wanted an older adult to be in that role, somebody over 55, in fact over 60 in that case. And it was very interesting. We had a fantastic response, an awful lot. 80% of the people who responded assumed that it was a dementia programme, which was an eye-opener because it absolutely wasn't. It was about developing capacity and actually volunteering and participation. But I think we haven't got to grips with this at all. And my nervousness sometimes is that actually what usually happens is somebody will say, oh yeah, we need more intergenerational work. And actually my sense is we need more multi-generational. The notion of the life course is what's useful here, thinking about all ages. Because very often you get old people pitted against younger people. It's an either or, and it's deeply unhelpful. So actually a much more I don't know if Clare agrees, but a multi-generational approach is absolutely what's needed. And I was at the National Trust conference a couple of weeks ago, and this came up as a huge issue, and actually the solution was seen to be, well, we just need to do more work with young people. And actually it's not understanding who our workforce is and how our workforce ages as we move forwards. And volunteering is such a critical part of that. We were talking at the National Trust about all those volunteers engaging their families. Many of them had grandparenting responsibilities, great-grandparenting responsibilities. How were they engaging their wider family members? How were they actually just part of their communities as a broader?
Going back to the point that Jonathan was making, I think there's a particular context within the East Midlands, which is that there's a large number of volunteer-run museums, and I think there's a particular characteristic there which is very different from other areas, other regions. Rob, would you like to say something about that?
Yeah, so that's my background, supporting community-led heritage in Leicestershire and Rutland specifically as part of an East Midlands-wide project. And I do recognise some of the characteristics that Jonathan describes. Yeah. There are issues with succession and with management quite often. But actually what I also see is a huge range of independent museum and heritage organisations. There's 50 independent museums in Leicestershire alone, in communities, in market towns. And actually, they wouldn't be there at all if it wasn't for older people who are running them. They are the trustees, they are the volunteers, and they go beyond cultural contributors or participants. They're cultural leaders, and they're really important in terms of the East Midlands and this county, and Lincolnshire as well actually is a very high number of independent volunteer-led museums as well. The older population are kind of seriously important and seriously valuable in preserving the cultural life of the county. And as we move to a situation where even local authority museum services are depending more and more and more and more on volunteers, here and elsewhere, I think what we're seeing is this scenario where actually older people are cultural leaders in these kind of smaller independent organisations, but are supporting larger organisations, staffed organisations, and are underpinning the cultural life of our cities and market towns and counties as well. So I think their contribution is huge and vast. I did some research a number of years ago about the economic contribution of volunteers in Leicestershire museums who were mostly over 65, I would say, and it was phenomenal. So I think it's, you know, without valuing those people, we run the risk of kind of losing a great deal of our cultural wealth.
But that also raises issues about succession planning as well. It also raises issues about sustainability. So, you know, it raises a whole range of other things.
I would just add to it as well, is, again, it comes back to older people have rights and responsibilities. They're not all the same. If somebody's not fulfilling their role properly, then they deserve a challenge to that role, to that performance, whatever age they are. And so I think in the age-friendly idea, in the ageing kind of world, we can't always also just have it that older people are always right, because they're not. Any more than younger people are always right. And if an older person chooses to try and play that particular card, that's not helpful either. And I think we need to be a little bit braver about talking about performance and responsibilities and the engagement, regardless of age, whilst respecting people's voluntary contribution. So any of the students here have you got any ideas or anything from...
This lady's been waiting for some time, is that okay?
Of course, please.
So Michaela Butter from the Attenborough Arts Centre. It was a kind of practical question, actually. I was interested to see that you were running an event Thursday evenings, I think.
Yeah.
One often hears that older people are frightened to go out in the evening. There's a kind of, you know, perhaps accepted myth. And I was just wondering how you had, you know, whether from your experience that was very successful, or whether running things during the day was more successful, and how you actually develop those audiences.
So the best, it's a really good question, because it is kind of the practicalities is where the great ideas can all come unstuck and all the grand plans. I was saying to Clare earlier, one of the first people I met on the Age Friendly board in Manchester was a woman called Margaret. Wonderful. Very, very sparky, and that's me being polite. I was sat next to her, and I just said, Margaret, what do you want from culture in this city? And she looked quite straight, and she kind of had this beige coat on, and she was rustling around because it had been raining in Manchester, and she just looked at me and she went, well, I'm so much more club night than tea dance. I just thought, that's the point. So, you know, that event wasn't for everybody. That's fine. The 250, 300 people who turned up absolutely had a ball. It was great. And we do other stuff on a Wednesday afternoon. And we do other things really late. There is a club night in Manchester, a band on the wall for older people. It's great. And actually, it isn't going to be for everybody, but that's absolutely fine. And I think for me, that's why I mentioned about having a level of collaboration within your place. So actually, it's why all those cultural organisations in the city do work together and need to work together. Because between us, we need a range. We need to have a kind of a really wide range of different kinds of activities that you might want to participate in. So yeah, we've had lots of feedback from people saying, oh, it's just, I hate the trams are dreadful, is accessing it, it's really hard, don't want to do it. And then we've had others who just like, oh, don't worry, I'll go with you, let's just go, let's try it. And I just think it's about having the widest range, really.
Thank you.
And just try it.
Brilliant, thank you. Anybody else? Yes, we've got a student here.
Hi, I'm a master's student in the postgraduate program, and I'm curious about, you both mentioned actually at some point, intergenerational relationships or multi-generational relationships. My question is, workplace, or museum sector aside, as far as employment goes, how can museums foster inter or multi-generational relationships through their programming or through their work? And what might the goals or the aims of those um, that engagement be?
You know what, I was thinking, museums are multi-generational. If you wander around a museum, I was wandering around the Leicester Museum earlier, Newark, and there were all ages there. There were conversations going on across different ages. They are by their nature. What we tend to do is we tend to parcel up our programmes. So I look at somewhere like Manchester Museum, we have 30,000 school kids a year. We have a primary schools programme, for example. That goes on over here. We have age-friendly programmes, and we have however many thousand coming on a range of different age-friendly programmes. We never think about actually the value of potentially bringing those together. And yet I know from my work in schools and from my work with ageing, both of those parties are interested in actually more connection to the widest range of people within their community. And so actually I think we're just at the beginning of this journey. We have all sorts of grandparents programmes. We have a very nice scrapbook at the museum which you can just bring and you can explore and share as a family. Grandparenting's a huge thing in the States, I know, and they have big days celebrating it. We do all of those, but actually we just want to encourage conversation among all ages, and that's about your staff. That's about the experience of the museum, and actually about that openness and that culture that hopefully encourages that. But I think we've got a long way to go and we could do more.
Great. Yes, we've got one question here.
Thank you very much for your presentations. I'm a potential visiting scholar for next year from the United States, and my question sort of piggybacks on the one that was just answered. I have the good fortune of working in East Africa, and we do some cultural work, and a lot of our artifacts, we have an event every year, and the elders come in. To them, they're not artifacts. They're their life, or they were their life. Even my mother, when she goes to our cottage, she'll say, why are we saving this? Or she'll go to a museum and say, I had one of those when I was a child. And I wondered, so in Tanzania we'll have meetings with the elders, and the youth just circle around to hear, because we're asking questions about the past or traditional systems, and the children gather and hear stories they've never heard. I mean, we have the advantage of respect to elders, so they don't make trouble and they're sitting in the quiet. But I wondered, with museums now, so many of the artifacts that you find in museums actually are part of a lifetime of older populations, and are there opportunities where elders are saying, this is my story, and so they can talk to younger generations?
It's happening quite widely. I know certainly one of my favourite objects in the museum is an elephant skeleton. A poor elephant called Maharaja that was walked from Edinburgh down to Manchester in a way that wasn't okay back in the day, and then lived its poor life in Bellevue Zoo, a zoo in East Manchester, until I don't know, about late 50s, and then eventually died, and we have the skeleton. And we have a very moving piece of film, actually, a whole group of people who live just around the corner from that zoo, who were just sharing their stories of being taken as children to see Maharaja, the poor, slightly sad-looking elephant, but actually we're talking to a group of other young children, and it's an incredibly powerful story, and it's very simple, it's just a film, and I think there are countless examples in museums across the country as interpretation, and as kind of as a interpretation for an exhibit. What I see very little of actually are those as social programmes and events. And I think that's really interesting, because that's something about whether it's a reluctance or we're not really bringing those people together, actually, as you were saying, around debate, and really making the most of the social space of the museum. So I think we do it when it's interpretation, we film it, we display it, but actually, are we really doing that in a way that all our museum visitors can participate in? Very, very rarely. And when we do, it's usually a project. So we did a big multi-generational choir project, but it was a distinct project. We're not doing it as part of our core business yet. We could learn a lot.
Could I just add to, I think it's a really very interesting question as to what we place value. So what you're describing is of older people talking, sharing, and younger people learning from it. And I think there is quite a lot that I've seen, as I'm not a museum specialist at all, but certainly museums of trams or of weaving and mill history and those sorts of things that we now regard as suitable to have a museum about. But we don't still place value on today's low-paid workers. So today's low-paid workers still have poor status, poor pay, poor conditions. And if you look at it in the field of ageing, healthcare workers, social care workers, we don't value them. I expect that in 50 or 60 years' time, a cohort of students will say, got a really good idea, we must place some value on, we must find some people who are healthcare assistants and social care workers, and it'll be fascinating to hear their stories. And it's fascinating now and I think some of the challenge is to stop thinking of ageing as something which is after life and then there's ageing, and then we'll look at it and then we can wrap it up and it has value. Is, do we place value on everybody through life? And because the answer is still no, there's therefore an interruption when we get to the point of ageing, because suddenly they all become nice and we value them, and they're lovely, old people are, and they have fascinating, interesting lives, and it'd be super to hear about them. We're not so interested in their granddaughters who are working in low-paid jobs on zero-hours contracts for poor employers, on rubbish shifts, and not having enough time to provide the care that the elderly need.
Do you think it would work? A quick question, I apologize.
And then we've got a question.
My great aunt died at 102, and she could never remember who I was. So we talked about World War II, and we talked about World War I, and she could remember all those stories. And so it would be an opportunity also for those who don't have present-day capacity to really delve into the past.
Absolutely.
Can we have this question? And this is our last one. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk and your great ideas. But seems tonight we talk a bit less about contemporary art center or museum. I think our program with aging group is really a big topic for us. But it seems that if we have projects about this, it's usually just one-off, and it's quite. I'm doubt about the sustainability of this kind of program, because it needs budgeting, it needs money from them, it needs funding about aging programs. And so if we done a very brilliant program, but then it's not sustainable, then what can we do? And what if the aging population is not really interested with contemporary art? What can we do with it? Can you have some suggestions for us?
I'm sure Esme's got some ideas.
Well, I think, the not interested in contemporary art, some are, some aren't. And so actually, we, because the Whitworth shows contemporary art, and it is a real mix. Some are really interested in it, because it is that thing, it is unexpected, and actually they're just interested in the contemporary world. And contemporary art is part of that. I think the sustainability issue is really important, and actually particularly at the moment, because there has been such a growth in funding for age-friendly programmes. There is a bandwagon now, and people are hopping on it left, right and centre. And actually, I think, and I include myself in that, we have had significant external funding for our age-friendly programmes. But the ones that are going to really make a difference in the longer term are the ones which actually are about genuinely working in partnership. So the public health post that I mentioned, this puts us at the heart of the devolution work that's happening, which has issues, but actually is about thinking about the role of culture within health and social care. It is thinking, that's why I started my talk thinking about that ethos of care, actually, for everyone. And I don't mean care in the medical sense of the word. I mean that notion of how you thrive. And actually, I think we have to be very entrepreneurial. We all do. But actually, really thinking about how the role of culture can be embedded in people's lives, whether that culture is contemporary art or a museum object, whether that's in an ageing population or early years. For me, that's about working in partnership with others. And actually, the money will run out in its current form. We will no longer be flavour of the month. It will move to something else. So actually, we need to be really smart moving forwards. And I think what we need to hold on to is culture. We can do things differently. I actually, the work I mentioned, around reaching older men that we did in the Wetherspoons, that was actually born in part out of the frustration by colleagues in the age-friendly team who had just been banging their heads against a brick wall trying to reach this particular group of older men. And actually, who knew that putting a poet and giving him a pint and sitting in the Wetherspoons over the road would crack that? Who knew? And actually it was about culture doing things differently. So I think we need to be really brave, and we need to ask those why not questions. And
We need a few pints of beer, really.
and contemporary art really helps us do that.
Could I just, do you mind me asking which country you're from?
I'm from Hong Kong.
From Hong Kong. Have you been studying here for long?
I'm a master's student here, so just 1 year.
So I'm just interested in that there's a difference in terms of funding between different countries and stuff, because your question is very clear and very well made.
Yeah.
And I think there is funding sometimes for particular projects for a variety of diversity issues. Usually when an institution has got trouble because somebody says, well, you've got a lot of very nice art in your gallery and you only really cater for this group of people, you need to reach out a bit. So, and then good, well-meaning people as well try their very best to be inclusive. But we'll see exhibitions to do with race, ethnicity, to do with sexual orientation, to do with age, to do with a variety of stages, special exhibitions, because those people need special things because somehow they're different. And I think the projects aren't and shouldn't be sustainable because that perpetuates that those groups of people are other than us. And we are all the people. The truth is, the middle ground, the mainstream, has effectively retained its power and retained its influence and actively excluded those people by the way it's worked, the positions of power and the resources that it's held on to. And tacking projects around the edge of it with a little bulletin board they can produce, I'm not denying they can produce some very good benefits and can be very interesting and very beautiful. But they produce essentially short-term benefits because they don't change the fundamental core. And we are all ageing. Some of us are all from different ethnic backgrounds, of different sexual orientations. We live in different places. We care about different things. We have different politics, different ideas. And if only a certain group of people are regarded as the core, forever, everybody else will be other. And I think the challenge is to say, well, actually, we need to look at ageing now and groups of older men who don't participate, or whatever it is, or working class culture, or people from particular backgrounds, because actually the powers that be have effectively kept them out. It's not that those people don't enjoy things that give them joy. The powers and the institutions have kept them out. And the challenge, I think, for those of you working within it, is to deliver good projects and good programmes, for sure, but it's not to be the people who keep everybody else out without even noticing you're doing it. Because there's nothing as good as feeling included. I've made it, I've got into the big meeting, I've got into the room, I'm one of the decision makers, and suddenly less interested in the people who are left behind.
And on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much to our two speakers, to Clare and Esme, for giving us such inspiring ideas and provocations as well. And a huge thanks to all of you for contributing and for the diversity of experiences that this audience bring. Thank you very much, and I hope that you will go away and think about every aspect of very diverse working environments you're from, but the role that museums and culture can have within that. So thank you very much indeed, and can we show our thanks?
Thank you.